You are not Durruti, but we are uncontrollable, beyond a critique of nonviolence. As discussions and debate around the use of violence in the Occupy movement continued, I felt that the debate overall was lacking. This essay was an attempt to wade through the bullshit of the 99% rhetoric and get to the real heart of what was at stake in the Occupy movement. Wanting to go beyond the talk about violence, I hope to raise political questions about the poverty of certain positions. Recently, at a forum on nonviolence versus diversity of tactics, an event that was attended by over 400 people for the purpose of discussing the role of violence within Occupy Oakland, the MC of the event, Rahula Janowski, put many things into context.
The Occupy movement, the movement of 99%, has already had a pretty enormous impact. I've seen it coming up. I've seen the language of the 99% and the 1% coming up in places like the San Francisco Board of Supervisors when they were talking about a housing project for rich people on the waterfront. I've seen it in movie reviews. There's a new Occupy-related meme on the internet practically every day. And the dialogue on a national level has changed. And all of that, and we're just getting started, right? So it's not surprising, given that growth, that there are divisions and there are differences coming up within the Occupy movement.
For the left, the Democratic Party, unions, nonprofits, various Marxist sects, liberals, activists, etc., the Occupy movement then is simply a democratic, albeit directly democratic, push towards reforming the state and how it manages the capital. We hear talk of abolishing the Federal Reserve, giving more power to the unions, and more taxes on corporations. These are not even reforms that seek to gain concessions that might make life better for the working class. They only attempt to make capitalism work better, or give more power to the institutions that manage the proletariat. As far as the left is concerned, the movement is showing signs of changing society when elected leaders and various social managers, media, academics, etc., begin to use language that the movement leaders, including Marxists, unionists, leftists, and some anarchists, have been using. The question of violence is not then an attempt at dialogue on revolutionary strategy or even a moral question, but instead a discussion on how the movement should tactically proceed to reform and work within the state structure. Thus, for many on the left, violence is problematic because it scares the state structure with the possibility of open revolt, not because people are opposed to violence per se. On the contrary, they support the monopoly of violence that is the state itself. Perhaps some leftists will be even made to believe that violence, often ill-defined, will be good for the movement as long as it is used to maneuver within the state structure. For us, though, the dividing line is more fundamental. For revolutionaries, the question of violence is secondary to the question of how the movement organizes itself, and how we see our activity directed. Is it against the state or not? Are we here to pressure the state into adopting positions or our language? We do not measure our power in such a way. Instead, these are examples of recuperation, the process in which antagonistic ideas and actions that could possibly negate class society are instead used to make it stronger. Revolutionaries who have pushed so hard in the decolonize/Occupy Oakland movement must once again draw clear lines in the sand. This means coming into complete conflict with much of what makes the Occupy movement what it is. The language of leaders. Since the start of the Occupy Wall Street protests, the concept of the 99% has spread throughout the world and become a new identity, one that many in the Occupy movement claim to be a part of. Some radicals heralded this new classification, proclaiming a return to class consciousness in the United States. Others, while critiquing the exact semantics, still agree that at least it was better than nothing, and was something that a better critique could be built on. Leftists and liberals were overjoyed that many anarchists and anti-authoritarians had handed them such an easy-made package, one that in fact swept away class analysis of society and replaced it with something much more sinister. The idea that the Occupy movement has returned to a sense of class consciousness implies that people's understanding of power relations and their positions within them comes from outside of their own experiences, and that, moreover, it takes a vanguard of specialized activists to bring such an understanding back into their lives. As the anarchist journal Murder of Crows wrote in an interview with Modesto Anarcho, we do not need to be reliant on the left for developing class consciousness. Class consciousness is not as scarce as some assume it to be. The widespread destruction of businesses and the attacking of the police in many riots makes this very clear. What is not present is class solidarity and widespread class conflict. We believe the experiences of the exploited, through direct action and social conflict, are the main focus of transforming people's perspectives and relations. There are many on the left who are much more ideologically committed. These people propose a more symbolic activity intended to appeal to those in power, or activities that seek to sow large numbers of people while de-emphasizing direct action. On occasion, they propose direct action as a last resort and as a simple tactic, a means toward political power. In every revolutionary movement and struggle, The left recuperated and liquidated uncontrollable radicals and anarchist elements. People should really study and learn from the history of failed social struggles. We should think about these things and be sharp in our criticism of and opposition to the left, not through obsessive anti-left ideologies that become an ends in themselves, but in order to understand how we deal and interact with them." Unquote. Often leftists believe that consciousness is something that comes from the left, the management of the proletariat, and that is something that must be raised and mass-produced until the number of adherents has reached a point of intensity where enough converts can change society. On the contrary, consciousness instead comes from the experiences of people in their everyday lives, and is not something that has ceased to exist since the passing of the workers' movement or the liberation struggles of the 1960s and 70s. Furthermore, many of the delusions that act as real barriers during class conflict and help to hinder solidarity between people are ideologies imposed from above as well as from much of the left. For instance, it was unions in post-McCarthy period that started using the term middle class to describe American workers in order to shift away from sounding communist. Thus, one of the tasks of the revolutionaries is to attack these false concepts, be they nationalism, statism, pacifism, or the concept of the 99%. As someone from Prol.info wrote in an interview, "I'm skeptical of the approach that people need to recognize something or see something clearly. Then they will start trying to change things. People's consciousness is very contradictory. Even people have a very well thought out political view on things. In most workplaces I've ever worked, everyone steals from work. At the same time, people stealing from work, if asked, would probably say, of course, they're for private property and are likely to be in favor of harsher sentences for people caught stealing. The point is, I don't think consciousness raising does much of anything. Being working class means struggling, even if it's struggling to survive. Just standing up for your own interests brings us into conflict with capital. Your average wage worker has any number of problems that are the same as everyone in their workplace, and similar to those that workers have all over the world. By fighting together against the boss, we can begin to see each other as allies. The stronger the struggle, the more we will see as possible. Of course, we need to put our ideas forward in the clearest and most coherent way we can. But much more important than that is to make concrete contributions to the struggle happening in our workplaces, neighborhoods, cities, and elsewhere. The only real threat to the system is a class movement. Working people coming together, fighting for our interests, refusing to work, blocking the flows of commodities, fighting the powers that hold this society together, and finding other ways to produce and live collectively." Unquote. Far from generating a critique of daily life, the Occupy movement has instead tended to sweep away the class analysis that exists in many of us. Police, prison guards, border patrol, developers, politicians, property owners, big and small, members of the extremely rich but not the 1%, are now considered part of the 99%, and according to the current analysis, have interests in common with the rest of us. But we do not have anything in common with the police. We are the ones that are policed. We have nothing in common with the banks that hold us hostage through rent and mortgage payments in exchange for shelter. We have nothing in common with the property owners, be it Goldman Sachs or the owner of the new condo development down the street, because we do not own property. We are slaves to the regime of work. The concept of the 99% sweeps away the very real dynamic of power we all feel every day to create some vague form of populism. We can clearly see the recuperation of the Occupy movement's language, which itself is an attempt to recuperate organic class consciousness, from the state institutions such as Oakland Police Department, which proclaims itself to be part of the 99%. It has also been a way for activists and leftists to cool down class conflict, trying to manage those who would engage with property or their protectors, the cops, by stating that they are attacking the other sector of the poor and working population. For instance, during the general strike, some people wrote graffiti and looted business in the absence of law enforcement. Many within the movement condemned the vandalism, even though such actions were very logical for many of those there, and were also featured in past conflicts in Oakland, namely the riots around Oscar Grant. It is the police themselves who ensure the relationship to property and keep people from expropriating commodities. Thus, when the innate consciousness of people, who by and large were not activists or anarchists, come out, it is condemned by those who scream the loudest about the 99%. Furthermore, the 99% is presented as a collection of people who come from different communities, yet share common interests in that they are not the 1%. This helps to further fractionalization of the proletariat itself, while maintaining the various divisions that are created from class society's existence. People of color are thus one community that has something in common with police, who are workers, and in turn have something in common with the small business owners and the trans people. This analysis, or lack thereof, does nothing to examine the realities of patriarchy, heterosexism, and white supremacy within class society, and instead glosses over the very real class antagonisms. As Prol.info wrote in their classic booklet, Work, Community, Politics, War, the whole point of talking about class and the proles is to insist on the very basic way in which people from different communities have essentially similar experiences. and to show that people from the same community should in fact hate each other. This is the starting point to fighting the existent communities. We begin to fight for our own interests. We see that others are doing the same thing. Prejudices fall away, and our anger is directed where it belongs. We are not weak because we are divided. We are divided because we are weak." Unquote. Creating the sea for sharks to swim in. Revolutionaries have done something that the current left in the US never could. They have created a situation and context for the forming of real human relationships and experiences, one in which actual change on a mass scale feels possible. In doing so, they have brought together much of the left in the process. The very same people that we know will sell us out, people who previously had politics totally antagonistic towards horizontal decision-making and direct action, now sell papers outside of the General Assemblies and on the sidelines of the riots. While these groups have remained on the sidelines, we must ask ourselves why we are allowing space to our political enemies, and what we could be doing to drive them out of the movement. The issue of unions is even more problematic. Many were excited by various local unions scrambling to be 2 steps ahead of their workers by endorsing the general strike in 2011. Local union leaders, in an effort to stop wildcat strikes from spreading and workers walking out, instead offered various ways workers could legally strike, or at least offered not to discipline them if they did participate. This was an attempt to remain legitimate, but also to keep workers from taking action on their own. If workers were joining in the general strike, at least they were doing it so under the direction of their own local leaders and as union members. It seemed many had forgotten the famous words of the situationist Guy Debord when he stated, "The representation of the working class has become the enemy of the working class. Those who seek to manage the proletariat do so in order to stop workers from taking the kind of actions necessary to create a revolutionary situation." This is not to say we should stop encouraging union members to participate in actions or to join us in struggle, although we should remember that most US workers are not union members. Instead, we need to encourage people to take action outside and against the union bureaucracy, who have pushed through austerity measures and backed democratic politicians that in turn attack them. Even a defensive struggle against attacks on the working class means an offensive attack on union leadership, the labor brokers and policing agents of the proletariat. Movement versus insurrectionary situation. What social movements have happened in the US since the anti-globalization period that have been neither strange collections of leftists nor completely recuperated by leftists in the end? None. When radicals intervene in such movements, it is always to break them out of the control of the left and to push the subversive and insurrectionary tendencies to their fullest extreme. We seek to push breaking of windows into full-scale looting, to push street battles with cops into full-blown revolts of entire neighborhoods against security forces. In doing so, we come up against activists who put their bodies in front of the property of capital, hey, 2 for 1, right? And movement leaders from leftists like Naomi Klein to anarchists like Starhawk. Other social movements that are often outside the established left, such as those against HR 4437 or SB 1070 anti-immigrant legislation in California and Arizona, include genuine class conflict. People walked out of school and work en masse, sometimes getting into battles with police as they held the street. Of course, these movements were quickly recuperated, and with the defeat of much legislation for fear of an immigrant uprising, the momentum that developed soon dissipated. Other social struggles and eruptions of class conflict, such as riots against police forces, follow a similar trajectory. We have to become better in these situations and not allow them to be lost to bureaucrats and managers. There are many pitfalls to avoid, and no single way that seems all that clear. On one hand, we see the social movements we are often drawn to as nothing but fronts for nonprofits, upper-class social managers, and career activists. These movements often mirror the alienation and class relations of wider society. And in the wake of Occupy, they often even use our slogans, imagery, and tactics as a means of staying relevant. For instance, the group 1 Billion Rising, who uses flash mobs and dancing protesters to decry violence and rape against women, a noble cause indeed, is a collection of politicians, nonprofits, and celebrities who use the phrase "strike, dance, rise" as their slogan, mimicking Occupy. On the other hand, we simply cannot wait for the next insurrection to break out, or hope to roll the dice the next time people go out into the streets that more than a dumpster is set on fire. If anything, one of our main tasks is now to try and struggle in the downtime, to make connections, make friends, and get ready. We are still the crisis. Many radicals busy themselves with fighting the crisis, or attempting to create social programs which will respond to attacks on the working class. It seems that many have forgotten the slogan, "We are the crisis," and the threat that the proletariat, the force of generalized human negation of class society, will be the gravedigger of the old world. Capital creates crisis, and an economy based on speculation, boom, and bust cycles will continue to create crisis after crisis, war after war, disaster after disaster. This is not to say that we should not take care of each other and others in times of need. but simply that our revolutionary program must not be one of charity and social service. We are not here to get people through hard times because we are activists and we will feel bad. On the contrary, we are here to push the realities of the crisis to its most subversive and explosive end, the complete destruction of our current way of life and the end of the separation between us. The fires lit in Oakland will not die out. The processes, experiments, and beginnings of creating communal power will not soon be smothered. We must understand the tensions that exist in the revolutionary movement and proceed from there. We must attack what keeps us from being free and continue to divorce ourselves from the regime of work, diving into the joy of the commune. Our movement is a conscious negative force that attacks the existing order as a means of demolishing the dictatorship of capital. Yet at the same time, it is also a positive material force. While destroying the separations between us, communizes the means of existence in the same breath. There is no way to separate these things. They must be one or not at all.